Today I'd like to continue our series on praying with the Transfiguration. We've been taking a look at the passage from Matthew about the Transfiguration and talking a little bit about it and then spending some time in prayer. So I'd like to read that passage, share it with you, and then we can pray together. This is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, verses 1 to 9. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. And then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and he touched them, saying, Rise and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone till the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Beautiful story of Jesus. We're at the last part of the story. The disciples had been prostrate. Jesus came and he touched them. And then it says, when the disciples raised their eyes. So they were so overwhelmed by this experience that their eyes were downcast. And Jesus, of course, touched them, helped them to overcome their fear. And you can understand in this situation why somebody would be afraid. It's kind of that type of situation where you're like, what's happening here? This is just such an overwhelming experience. You're like, what do I do with it? Where do I go with it? And very difficult to process it, especially if it's happening all at once to you. So they raised their eyes and they saw no one else. So Moses and Elijah no longer there. They saw no one else, but they saw Jesus alone. A very important aspect of this story. Can we focus in our prayer on Jesus alone? Moses, certainly important. He's the lawgiver. Elijah, very important as a great prophet. But our focus is on Jesus. We want to follow Jesus. We want to follow his ways, his teachings, his example. We want to be faithful as Jesus was faithful. We want to love as Jesus loved. We want to, as St. Paul says, become other Christs by, as well as we can, following him. And it helps in our prayer. We can keep our eyes on Jesus alone. Then after that, they come down from the mountain with Jesus, the 3 apostles. And Jesus says, do not tell this vision to anyone. Jesus wants them just to keep it to themselves. It's not like the good news that he shares and, tell everyone. And of course, this is good news. It's amazing news about Jesus and his intimacy with God, his intimacy also in the same line as Moses and Elijah, keeping that line, the law and the prophets. But Jesus doesn't want this shared. And he says, don't tell it to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. So after the resurrection, feel free to share it. Why? Because after the resurrection, people will be able to understand a little bit more about this type of vision and who Jesus is, and that special, intimate relationship that Jesus has with God and that Jesus wants to share with us. So let us in our prayer focus on Jesus alone and the message that Jesus gives us. Jesus, we thank you for this wonderful vision, this transfiguration. Help us always to keep our focus on you and your promise of new life for us. You were transfigured to show us your glory, to show us your relationship with the Father, to show us your intimacy also with Moses the lawgiver and Elijah the prophet. You come with that message of good news for all, that message of love, that message of joy, that message of new life. Help us to embrace that message that you gave to Peter and James and John on that mountain. Help us to embrace it within ourselves. And help us to share it, to share the glory, to share the love, to share the power, to share the intimacy, the kindness, the generosity that you have for us. And most of all, your forgiveness, your mercy, and your deep love for us. And we ask this prayer in your name, today and always.